Okay. Hello and welcome back to the channel. I've changed top since the last video, but Fang has not moved. I didn't want to disturb him. He's been here for 2 weeks. This is dumb. Today I want to talk to you about one of my favorite sci-fi authors who is notable for not actually having written any published novels, and instead he is primarily a work of short stories, short fiction. And that is Ted Chiang and his 2 collections of short stories, Stories of Your Life and Others and Exhalation. And as I do at the start of all these videos, this is a very nice first edition copy from the States. Very, very nice. And this is a copy that Laura got me. This is the first Goldsboro signed and numbered edition of Exhalation, number 96. Oh, I have one more copy. I have the Subterranean Press copy of Exhalation as well, which is beautiful. It's got this really nice blue tint towards the center of the spine, which is very fun. And I love this. I bought this at Worldcon in 2024. And I think it's beautiful, but I'm going to put it back and I'll use these as my props. So, Ted Chiang. What is it about his short stories that is so brilliant? Ted Chiang is, I think, one of the smartest sci-fi authors of the modern age. His work is so full of deep imagination, but also deep scientific exploration. All of his short stories tend to follow some kind of what if question. So to give you an example, in the first story in Stories of Your Life, it's called Tower of Babylon. You could say the what if is, what if heaven was a physical place that you could get to? And so if you know the title Tower of Babylon, if that means anything to you, it might remind you of the Tower of Babel from the Bible. And this is a kind of retelling, but where everything is physical and real. So, you know, this is a world in which they are actually building this tower. And what does life look like under the shadow of this tower? What does life look like on the tower? What happens when you break through into the upper atmosphere? How does that affect various other things, you know? Is this a grand universe cosmology, or is this a more biblical cosmology? And you get answers as you go along, because these are people who are climbing the tower in order to try to break into heaven at the top. In the classic experience, we'd expect pop out in the middle of some clouds, but no, these people who are climbing the mountain are miners, as in pickaxe and rocks and things. And they're being sent up to the top of the tower because they have hit the bottom of a giant dome. I mean, what is like that enough in itself? You could just kind of put that on the paper, and telling the story of what happens is interesting enough. But this is just one of his many amazing kind of what if questions. I'll tell you another one. These are all stories that really stuck with me. Also in Stories of Your Life, there is 72 letters. And this is one that follows the Kabbalistic ideas of golems and, you know, the use of symbology and letters in order to basically encode some kind of sentience, some kind of function within these kind of figurines made out of clay or made out of other materials. You're being a bit chirpy, mate. There you go. Oh, big scratches. Oh dear. Okay, I'll stop. So this is then also combined with a very early thought, which was around at what point does the human being enter existence? So naturally we are at the point of conception, we are an egg and a sperm, but within that egg is the grandchild encoded in that egg. And so the book explores the mechanics of that at the same time as exploring the mechanics of this. This is probably not the best example because it's probably one of his most complex short stories, but it really stuck with me. You know, I liked how these things were kind of just taken to be real. And in fact, that story reminds me a lot of Jonathan Strange. So it's all set in this world that feels like our world, but then you know, kids also have these little walking figurines that are, you know, encoded with these Hebrew letters. I'll go through a few more because I think that once you get the idea of the kind of stories that he tells, you'll know if his work is for you. So there's this really fascinating story, also in Stories of Your Life, I'll get onto Exhalation in a minute, which explores the psychology of a woman who discovers a flaw in the center of our mathematical model that she can't explain away. She's a very clever mathematician, and she discovers this flaw and is desperate to try to explain the flaw away to be able to come up with a reason why this flaw she's discovered actually is false, disprovable. But as she continues on, the flaw becomes more and more rigid. She has no other way to interpret it. It's a very personal story because she deals with a lot of emotional trauma related to realizing that the world that she's been studying for all those years is kind of at its center flawed, she loses her instinctual sense of whether something is correct or not, because simple arithmetic is no longer correct. That was a very personal story. He really engages with the emotions. So all these stories are kind of different lengths as well. This one's quite a short one. One of the longer stories that I read of his is almost like a novelette, and that you can find in Exhalation. And this one is called The Life Cycle of Software Objects. And I think this one is more pertinent now than when it was written, and it was written in 2010. So we are 15 years later. In 2010, Ted Chiang was already writing about AI sentience and AI personhood. At the center of this story is the creation of these artificial intelligence avatars called digients that all kind of resemble, well, they can resemble whatever the owner wants them to look like. They can be animals, like pets, or they can be, robots, but they all have these personalities, and you're put into this story where people are basically getting the first wave of these digital avatars. And as the story progresses, these avatars become kind of sort of obsolete, and people become less interested with them because the novelty has kind of worn off. As these stories move along, these digients still exist. They still have these fully fledged personalities, but they are being deprecated. They're being sunsetted by the software engineers behind the artificial world in which they reside. So there are these efforts to be able to create robots in the real world that can be moved and that can be piloted by the digients, that essentially they become these real world objects. And then the question becomes, what happens when that support is going to finally be taken away? What can be done? We have to ask some quite profound questions about the rights of these digital lives. Do they have sentience in the same way that we do? What do their choices mean when they have been programmed in a certain way? I think that story is fascinating, and it's probably one of his longest ones in these collections. Also in Exhalation, you'll find my favorite short story of all time, just full stop, which is The Merchant and the Alchemist's Gate. This short story is wonderfully told by LeVar Burton in his podcast, LeVar Burton Reads. So if you aren't sold on picking one of these short story collections up, you can go and find that and listen to it. It's only going to cost you an hour and a half of your time, and you will know immediately from listening to LeVar Burton, the expert's storyteller, read that story, whether or not Ted Chiang is for you. The Merchant and the Alchemist's Gate is a time travel story, but it is told in a style that resembles 1001 Nights. So our protagonist is the merchant in the title, and he is going through this market and walks into a tent where he discovers this alchemist who has invented these hoops that allow you to travel through 10 years into the past. And then in the past, he is there in having just invented these things. So there's a causal loop that, so you can see it's sci-fi mixed with other genres in a really interesting way. As the merchant decides whether or not to use this time travel apparatus, the alchemist is telling him of the tales of people he knew who used it and what happened to them. and how it affected their lives. So each of these people has a moral tale associated with them, and then they interlink in a really interesting way. And then the story comes around at the end in a really interesting, it's masterful. Honestly, I can't think of a better written short story. It's just so clever and brilliant, and he's a genius. He's a genius. So I'll tell you about one more story, which is another one of my favorites, which is Anxiety is the Dizziness of Freedom. There are these devices that are about the size of a suitcase that when you press a button, essentially due to quantum mechanics, the suitcase, this apparatus splits, time. It bifurcates time into two places. So essentially, depending on what light you see, you know which timeline you're on. If you're about to make a tough decision and you want to find out what life might have been like if you made the other choice, you can essentially decide, okay, if the light appears blue, then I'm going to pursue this one avenue, and if it appears red, I'm going to pursue this other avenue. And the trick is that these machines, due to their quantum entanglement, can essentially write to a hard drive which can be read on the other side in the other timeline. So you can video call, sort of, or you can send simple messages to the person in the other timeline. So that's the start of the story. That's where things first go. But then, because Ted Chiang's so clever, he's thought of all these other implications that could come out from having this device. If someone died, could you find another briefcase belonging to someone else where that person didn't die in the other branch of their timeline? And so you could essentially communicate with people who have passed away. And how would you facilitate that? I think it's fascinating. I think he's brilliant. He's one of my favorite sci-fi authors. I hugely recommend his work. And the good thing / the bad thing is, here's his work. At least here's his published work in physical format that you can buy in bookshops. So you can get through it pretty quickly, and you can always dip in and out. I mean, these are short stories after all, so you can decide which ones you want to read. But yeah, look, hopefully I've convinced you, but if you need any more convincing, just go and listen to LeVar Burton's version of The Merchant and the Alchemist's Gate, and I guarantee you will have a great time. So there you go. I think you should read Ted Chiang, and I will stake my whole reputation on the fact that you will like his work. There you go. Thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.